Imagine a beast born from the abyss of our collective online nightmares. A creature whose name sends a shiver down the spines of those who dare to utter it. It observes from the shadows, its presence an unwelcome chill in the dead of night. The Rake, a name synonymous with terror, its existence trapped in the obscure underbelly of the internet, concealed within the realm of urban legend and cryptid lore. An unsettling blend of man and monster. Its depiction has been etched into the psyche of internet users across the globe. The Rake infiltrates our dreams, lingering on the precipice of our deepest fears. Yet its manifestation in our world is as an elusive whisper, an unknown that walks the line between our reality and the digital world. This abomination, crafted from the darkest corners of our imagination, is far more than a figment. For those unfortunate enough to cross its path, it's often the last entity they will encounter in this life. An encounter with the Rake doesn't merely haunt you, it consumes you. Its spectral gaze, the last thing you see before the void of darkness takes hold. So where did this creature, this terror that lurks in the corners of our screens and the recesses of our minds, originate? Could the Rake, a beast seemingly born of the digital age, have roots stretching back further than we could have ever imagined? Do ancient tales and age-old fears cradle the origins of this modern horror? Today, we're embarking on a journey that leads us deep into the labyrinth of the Rake's past. We'll peel back the layers of horror and explore the realm of ancient folklore, unearthing echoes of the Rake that whisper in the tales of long-forgotten creatures. Together, we will tread the path from the present, stepping back into the ages to find the true genesis of this creature, this Rake. And as we embark on this chilling voyage into the depths of horror, I invite you to join me. Stay vigilant, keep your mind open, and remember, not all nightmares fade when we wake. In 1964, a suicide note, an epitaph of sorts, was discovered. It was a cry from the void, a final testament of a soul tormented by the haunting visage of the Rake. The poor soul had awoken to its presence, its voice, and the chilling emptiness of its gaze. The fear of sleep became too much, the terror of what might await upon awakening overwhelming. They chose the final sleep over facing the creature again. In the same box, a personal letter surfaced, ominously hinting at the presence of the Rake. A prayer uttered, a name spoken, a chilling confirmation of the beast's existence. A journal from 1880, its words trembling with unspeakable fear, repeated a mantra of terror. A mantra born of the Rake's chilling gaze and its hauntingly hollow eyes. Sleep was the enemy, an abyss where the creature's voice echoed, unintelligible and maddening. In a mariner's log dating back to 1691, a cryptic entry tells a tale of a nocturnal visitation. The sensation of the Rake's presence was so overwhelming that the mariner decided to return to England, never to revisit the site of his encounter with the cryptid. Fast forward to 2006, a family returning from a joyous holiday becomes the victim of another horrifying visitation. An apparition at the foot of their bed, a figure neither man nor beast, its posture disturbingly unnatural. In the stillness of the night, the creature moved with eerie silence, its motion a flurry of limbs and terror. In an instant, it was gone, leaving a trail of fear and a dying child who uttered its name with her final breath. He is the Rake. The aftermath was as tragic as the encounter itself. In a desperate attempt to save their child, a life was lost, and the once joyous family was shattered. The community tried to help, to understand, but the truth was too chilling, too unsettling to be shared. The Rake had marked its territory, scarred the survivors, and retreated back into the realm of nightmares. The mother and her surviving son, unable to return home, embarked on a quest for answers. It was a 2-year-long hunt, trawling the depths of the internet, poring over old letters and accounts, anything that might give them clues to the creature that had torn their family apart. They found echoes of the Rake and tales as old as time, whispers of its existence across centuries. In her quest for answers, the mother set up a digital recorder, hoping to capture any hint of the beast's presence. After days of sifting through hours of audio, she heard it. The shrill, unworldly voice of the Rake, a voice that took her back to that fatal night. The creature, it seemed, had been visiting her silently, marking its territory, waiting for its moment. The Rake had not been seen since that nightmarish encounter, but its presence lingered, always lurking at the periphery, always watching, always waiting. The mother lived her life on a knife edge, waiting for the night when she would wake up to see the creature, the Rake, once more. Our journey now takes us deep into the frozen wilderness, where the howling winds carry with them whispers of a sinister entity, shrouded in the chill of the unknown. The spectral figure is none other than the Wendigo, an entity not of flesh and bone, but of insatiable hunger, cold and ceaseless desolation. Its grotesque form is said to mirror the harshness of the land it haunts. Skeletal and gaunt, a grotesque parody of starvation, yet with an unending craving for human flesh. Some accounts even dare to embellish its monstrous figure with antlers, or depict it as a towering giant, each grim detail striving to underscore its chilling departure from the natural world. The Wendigo is deeply entwined within the cultural tapestry of the Algonquin and other Native American tribes. More than just a fearsome creature of the night, the Wendigo is a warning echoed through time, a chilling admonition against the unthinkable act of cannibalism and the perils of human selfishness, especially in the face of relentless winters when survival hangs by a thread. The tale of the Wendigo is a grim reminder of the monstrous transformation that awaits those who yield to their darkest instincts. In the untamed wilderness of northern Canada, where human footprints are scarce, a wealthy man sought the thrill of a hunt. His footsteps led him to a trading post, a meager bastion of civilization amid the expanse of wild. Here he searched for a guide willing to take him into the uncharted. The locals warned him of danger, of territories unmapped and unmastered. But his obstinance prevailed. In his quest, he found an Indian named Drekavac, driven by desperation and the glint of money. They pitched camp near a vast frozen lake, a blank canvas of ice under the somber winter sky. 3 fruitless days passed. The wilderness remained untouched by their presence. On the 3rd night, a storm serenaded them with a ghostly symphony of howling winds. The man, entranced by the unseen tempest, peeled back the tent flap, revealing a disturbingly still tableau. The trees stood unswayed, the air unbreathed, yet the howls persisted. A spectral voice on the wind calling Drekavac. Panic gripped Drekavac. He was cornered in the tent, his face buried in his arms. The hunter questioned, received denial, but the wind sang the truth. Each call sent Drekavac spiraling further into unease. Suddenly, he was seized by an invisible force, rushing towards the tent's exit. The hunter wrestled him to the ground, pleading not to be abandoned, but the wind's serenade was relentless. Its invisible grasp tugged Defago into the abyss. His cries echoed in the darkness. "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire," as his voice became one with the fading storm. Daybreak painted tracks in the snow, a trail leading towards the lake, its surface a frozen mirror to the world above. The footprints were long, abnormally so, almost as if something had lifted Defago, aiding his escape. The tracks halted mid-lake, vanishing without a trace. No hole, no sign of a plunge. His eyes scanned the ice, his mind racing when the wind returned. Its howls wove Defago's cries through the air, cries from above, his torment echoing from the sky. Fear gripped the hunter's heart, urging him to flee. He left food, a hopeful lifeline, packed and vanished from that haunted place. Civilization welcomed him weeks later, his mind still marred by the unfathomable event. When he returned the next year, the trading post still stood, but Defago had disappeared, swallowed by the wilderness or perhaps the wind itself. Some joked about the Wendigo, a mythical creature that comes with the wind, burning feet with speed before flinging his victim into the sky. A ridiculous tale, they chuckled, a product of wild imaginations. Days later, a stranger arrived at the post, an Indian wrapped in a blanket, hat obscuring his face. The hunter saw something similar in the stranger. Approaching him, he queried, "Are you Defago?" Silence. He asked more questions, received no answers. Concern sparked. The man lifted the hat, hoping to peer into the stranger's face. The sight that met him was not of a face, but of ashes. A pile of ashes where a man should have been. A scream ruptured the air, a chilling echo of the truth behind the tale of the Wendigo. Algonquin legends say the Wendigo was once a man like you and me. Poisoned by greed and gluttony, the man turned into a pale, gaunt creature with sunken eyes, reaching limbs, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Always hungry, the Wendigo searched constantly for its next meal, but that's all just a legend. The truth, however, is much worse. My name is Charles Keeper, and I was an investigative reporter for a local paper in Wisconsin. If that sounds impressive, then you have the completely wrong idea about my career. Mostly, they sent me out to the middle of nowhere to investigate supernatural events and creatures. Half the people I talked to were making up BS stories, and the other half were hopelessly deluded. Not exactly a perfect job, but hey, whatever puts food on the table, right? My last investigation brought me to a small town nestled deep in the northern forests of Wisconsin. So the curious among you do not seek out this town. I won't mention its name. Trust me, it's for your own good. In any case, the remote settlement made a small buzz after a young man living with his mother reported 2 grisly murders. One he committed himself, and another he claimed was the work of the Wendigo. The man, who I shall simply call Robert, told authorities he heard a scream while hunting one evening. Following the noise down one game trail, he found his neighbor half-eaten while a skeletal white creature stood over him covered in blood and gore. Robert shot several rounds into the creature and then burned its body. The body of the Wendigo was later identified as that of a man who had gone missing almost 15 years prior. Robert never stood trial. To get a closer look at the full story, I first met with Robert at his home. I realized it might not be the smartest idea to visit a confessed murderer on his own property. However, I made certain his mother would join us. Even a crazed killer wouldn't hurt an innocent reporter in front of his own mother, or so I told myself. Their home was a shack battered and broken by time. Dust fogged the windows and weeds strangled the rickety porch. The front door, where Robert waited eagerly for me, hung at an angle and swung to even the gentlest breeze. "You're here," Robert said. He sounded surprised, but pleasantly so. His lips curled into a wide, yellow-toothed smile and then faltered, falling into a gloomy frown. We shook hands and headed into the living room to talk. The room smelled of spilled beer and old deli meat. Robert invited me to sit on the couch, no doubt the source of the dizzying stench. I didn't plan on staying long. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said. "I know what you went through must have been difficult, so I won't pry too deep. But please, if you would, recount that day for me in as much detail as you're comfortable with. Our readers are eager to hear the truth." Robert shrugged. "Ain't nothing. People deserve the truth, even if it's hard to hear." "I couldn't agree more," I said. I forced a smile. "Truth be told, I'm just happy someone wants to hear my story," he said. "The newspapers, you read them. They making me out to be some lunatic killer." "Well, I work for a newspaper," I said, "but we're dedicated to all sides of the story, and that includes your side, so whenever you're ready." I pulled out a notebook and pen. Scratching his head, Robert glanced up and to the side, his brows scrunched together as he struggled to recall his story. Real or fake, I didn't know or care. After some time, Robert shrugged again. "Nothing special about that day," he said. "I went out hunting. There's some game trails back through the woods there. Didn't find nothing, of course, and night came all quick-like, so I was just heading home. And that's when you found your neighbor?" He nodded. "Wasn't 3 yards from the backyard, if you can believe it." I couldn't. At first, I didn't see anything. Like I said, night came all quick-like. Clouds all across the sky, so not a moon or a star to see. But I heard it. He made an unsettling sound like a dog gnawing on a bone. Then down the path, I shined my flashlight. "I see it, and Kev, my neighbor, and the Wendigo." "What did it look like?" I asked. "It was tall with long white limbs. Its skin was stretched thin as if it didn't fit its bones. And its eyes, they were sunken in, like big black pits. They were cold, dead. Nothing there but hunger and hate." His brow pinched together and his mouth fell open. Blood too. Blood everywhere. On its arms, on its face, on its chest. And there Kev is. He cleared his throat and muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch it. God bless him, he was just torn to shreds. That beast, the Wendigo, still had bits of him in his teeth. Well, I got my Ruger and I pumped 5 shots in it. No hesitation. "You and Kev were close?" "Good guy. We hunted together on occasions. Ma says he went looking for me in the evening, wanted to ask me something. Now I'll never know what," Robert said. He stared into the distance and said nothing. I was beginning to wonder where his mother was. So far, she hadn't made an appearance, and the longer the silence lingered, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I made a curt cough. "And the 5 shots, did they kill the creature?" "Seemed so. Howled something awful and fell to the ground," Robert said. "But I don't take no chances. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it, and I knew the legends. Only fire can kill a Wendigo. So I ran back home, got some gasoline, and I lit it up." His face spread into a proud smile. I said. "The police identified the Wendigo as..." "Yeah, I know," Robert interrupted, "but I didn't know him." "You think it was this man or something else?" I asked. Robert shrugged. "Could be. They say the Wendigo used to be human." Just then, a small, shriveled woman shuffled into the living room. "Ain't no human," she said in a harsh, combative tone. "Ma," Robert said. "I told you before," she said. "Wendigo just means an evil spirit. It ain't no human. I told you before, Robbie." "You think it's a spirit?" I asked his mother. I do, she said. You know how many people have gone missing over the last 50 years? 5. We only have a few hundred people in this town. Something ain't right with that forest. It ain't natural. You want my advice? Don't go near it. I chuckled. Funny you should say that. I was just about to ask if you'd show me where you found the Wendigo. I can show you where the game trail starts, Robert said, but even I won't go down that way again. You're not thinking of looking around, are you? His eye twinkled with genuine concern. Robert may have been a murderer, but I could tell he truly believed the story he told me. I pitied him. You already killed the Wendigo. What do I have to fear? I said. The wrinkled old woman scowled. Don't go looking for trouble, she said, 'cause you'll find it and you'll be sorry. A good reporter would follow up on the story with the police. If Robert's mother was right, the town had too many missing persons than could be explained. But I am not a good reporter. I wanted to go home. It didn't matter whether or not I got to the bottom of the story, my readers would eat this garbage up anyway. So I went out to the woods looking for more Wendigos. One night in the forest, I'd call the story finished. It's not like I expected to see anything. The forest was a forest. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Dead brown leaves blanketed the floor while reaching black branches blinded the sky, and through the woods ran a winding dirt path where Robert used to hunt. After walking up and down the trail for an hour, a starless, moonless night had cast everything in shadow, so I made camp for the night. I set up a tent and lit a small fire to keep me warm. Once the flames grew tall and bright, I pulled out my notebook. Late in the evening, I heard strange noises. Rustling trees, muffled clatter. A shadow shifted among the silhouetted trees. It could have been a person or an animal, but the hair on my neck stood up straight. I didn't feel safe. None of it was true. I hadn't experienced anything outside of the forest's usual sights and sounds. The fire cracked. I sighed. I was tired of spending nights alone in the forest making up stories about fictional characters. There are much better ways to spend one's time and make one's money. I was still young. Maybe I could switch newspapers and write something real for a change. I heard another crack, then another. This time they hadn't come from the fire. I squinted into the dark forest. It had to be some kind of animal. All sorts came out at night to forage possums, raccoons, skunks, and so on. But as I searched into the woods, I saw the branches bend and snap. The animal was large, a coyote perhaps. What else could it be? Leaves rustled, the sound was close. Whatever it was approaching the fire. I looked long and hard for the source of the noise, and soon I saw an inky shadow passing from tree to tree. Robert, I asked the dark figure, is that you? There was no answer. Robert, nothing. Now I was growing afraid. Against all logic, I entertained the possibility that maybe Robert and his mother were right. Maybe there are such things as wendigos and evil spirits. I hope not. Just in case, I grabbed a log and lit one end in the fire. Robert said only fire could kill a wendigo. It was probably bullcrap, but, better safe than sorry. Before long, the noises stopped. I waited and listened with the flaming log in hand. Minutes passed, one after another, but the forest was silent. After several bated breaths, I relaxed. The campfire, which I had all but forgotten about, had burned down to its last embers. The dark coals smoldered faintly, so I placed my makeshift weapon on top and tried to coax the fire back to life. Just then, I heard the crunch of leaves close behind me. I whirled around, but there was nothing. Only my tent trembling slightly to a cold breeze. I built the fire into a great blaze whose heat and light gave me strength. For hours I watched the flames dance and listened for any noise, big or small. Thankfully, I heard nothing. And by the time the fire finally died, I was exhausted but calm. With my fears behind me, I headed into my tent to rest. It was then that I saw it for the first time. The Wendigo. Its face, not at all human, was a pallid skull adorned with gnarled black antlers. To fit inside the tent, the towering creature hunched over its limbs, but its body was not pale or emaciated as Robert had described. With one look, it was solid black flesh with muscles wide and bulging. However, I didn't get to look long before it knocked me out cold. I woke up in a dingy cave with a raging headache, a chill running down my spine. I was naked, bound to a rock slab, and utterly terrified. Beside me were two other slabs, each with a pale, naked body on them. Even in the dark, I could see the curve of their bones pressing so tightly against their skin I thought it might burst. They were dead. They had to be. Yet, when I called out for help, the two bodies stirred suddenly as if waking from sleep. You're alive. Oh, thank God, I said. Where are we? How long have we been here? What's happening? For all my questions, I only received anxious grunts and groans in response. The two people craned their necks to look at me. When I saw their faces, I shrieked in horror. They weren't people, not anymore. Their eyes had receded into their skulls and their teeth had narrowed to beastly points. Bloody sores spotted their hairless scalps and scars marked their gaunt cheeks. When they looked at me, they gnashed their teeth and licked their tattered lips. I had no doubts Robert had seen one of these creatures, but why were they tied up? And what was the creature I saw in my tent? I didn't know. All three stone slabs faced a long, gaping tunnel that stabbed deep into the hillside, far from the touch of light. I strained to see its end, yet I could see nothing. And as I looked deeper into the tunnel, I saw a white skull and black antlers emerge silently. Hey, I said. Who are you? What do you want? The creature eyed me with a hollow stare and then sank back into the darkness. My heart raced in my chest as I struggled against my restraints, but they would not budge. I felt around for something to help me escape, but the ropes pressed down on my wrists. I could only reach fruitlessly with the tips of my fingers. No, I muttered in a shrill, frantic voice. No, please, help me, help. My breath grew short and shallow until my lungs trembled. No matter how hard I grasped, I couldn't get enough air. Soon my vision spun and went black. When I woke up, I found my captor seated on a rock. Though it had no eyes to blink, the creature was staring at me. What do you want? I asked. It cocked its head to one side, but said nothing. You aren't human. What are you? A ghost? A spirit? The creature grumbled low in its throat. A spirit, is that it? The creature murmured in a deep, guttural voice. Whatever words it spoke, it was no language I had ever heard before. A demon? A windigo or something? Wendigo, it said in a menacing tone. The Wendigo stood and approached me. It lowered his hand onto my bare chest and then growled. Then, pulling his head back, the Wendigo turned and walked towards the next captive. The pale beast on the table was already squirming with anticipation. What do you want? I asked again. The creature spoke several words in its foreign tongue. I don't understand, I said. Food must starve, it said as it scanned the captive's willowy body. I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. I hurled another barrage of questions at the Wendigo, but this time it ignored me. From out of thin air, the Wendigo produced a short steel knife. Without hesitation, he pressed the keen blade against the captive's sickly white skin. The beast wailed in pain as the Wendigo shaved off a sliver of skin, but when that deed was done, the bony creature raised its head. Mouth agape, it stretched towards the slice of flesh like a flower to the sun. Then, chanting, the Wendigo fed its prisoner. In an instant, the meager strip of skin was gone, consumed without second thought. But the chants continued for several seconds more, and when they finally ended, the pale beast began to whimper. It shrank in on itself and trembled visibly. Delighting in its fear, the Wendigo chuckled. Then, after a long, disturbingly silent moment, The Wendigo thrust its hands into the beast's stomach. Soon the cave filled with the victim's shrieks of horror and pain, and the Wendigo's moans of pleasure. I closed my eyes, too scared to watch. Several minutes passed before the screams finally died down. I cracked open my eyes. Somehow, the pale creature's stomach was untouched. Even so, it continued to writhe on the slab, traumatized and in agony. As for the Wendigo, it had moved on to the next victim. Cruel laughter rumbled low in the cave, accented by the shrill whimpers of the imprisoned. The ritual was about to begin again. I heard the cry of steel, and of pain, and of pleasure. Firstly, we examine their insatiable hunger. While the Wendigo is infamous for its relentless craving for human flesh, the Rake harbors a similar insatiable desire. Instead of physical nourishment, however, it feeds on terror and chaos, leaving a trail of psychological devastation in its wake. Next, we consider their disturbing physical forms. Both entities are often portrayed as thin, almost skeletal figures, an unsettling image that serves to underscore their otherworldly and horrifying nature. Despite hailing from different origins, both creatures are linked to the cold, darkness, and the sinister undertones these elements bring. Although the Rake isn't explicitly associated with the winter, it's frequently depicted as a creature that thrives in the night, connecting it to a similar chill of dread that the Wendigo instills. Lastly, but certainly no less distressing, is their shared association with nightmares and madness. Both the Wendigo and the Rake have a terrifying knack for inducing intense fear and insanity in their victims. Their presence is a harbinger of nightmarish experiences, pervading an aura of impending doom that can unhinge even the most rational minds.
Drekavac se negdje čuje, pogledajte, imamo ovdje i kjera.
Imamo kjera.
Kjera.
Ništa.
Znači ovdje je sad oko 7 sati uveče.
Čuo si ništa teresi.
Vidite ljudi. Čujete?
Kao je neko kolje ti.
Ne čujete?
Laju kjerovi.
A se čuje.
Laju kjerovi.
Joj, je zivu.
Kod je neko kolje dete.
Ljudi, nešto šuška.
A chill brushes past your ear as an eerie wail echoes through the darkness. Your heart pounds, the hairs on your neck stand tall. Something is here. An entity from the shrouded depths of Slavic folklore. The Drekavac. This ghastly apparition defies the natural order with a grotesque silhouette. It's presented as a haunting image of distortion, bearing a body so gaunt it barely seems capable of supporting life. The Drekavac's form stretches into an unsettling length, spindly and skeletal, its proportions twisting the boundaries of reality. Its neck, longer than any earthly creature, draws your terrified gaze upwards to a sight that freezes your blood, a skull-like head, the face of death itself etched in bone, hollow sockets seemingly peering into your very soul. The Drekavac, a symbol of the macabre, a monstrous form manifested from the most distressing corners of the human psyche. The dread of the Drekavac is steeped in a sorrowful tale. The word Drekavac translates directly to the screamer or the yeller, a name etched from the chilling resonance of the creature's haunting wails. These screams, as told in Slavic folklore, are not born out of malice or the desire to terrorize. Rather, they emanate from the depths of a profound, unbearable loneliness. The Drekavac is said to be the restless spirit of an unbaptized child, trapped in a limbo between this world and the next. It's a tormented soul denied the sanctity of religious passage, eternally wandering, forever crying out for the peace it was never afforded in life. Through the mournful cries of the Drekavac, we hear the echoes of a tragedy, a life not lived, a spirit not at rest, forever echoing through the ether, the embodiment of despair and misfortune. In the dead of night, it is the Drekavac's lament that sends shivers down our spines and reminds us of the creature's haunting origin. Most beautiful places have shadows. Some shadows are darker than others. You wouldn't be able to see it at first, but over the idyllic crests and vales of the Dinaric Alps and the Balkans, there slept a 30-year shadow in a town that is not on any map. The town was called Jastrovica, no more than 3 hours by car from Sarajevo. When we hiked into the valley where the village lay, silent as an empty casket, I guess the shadow decided it was time to wake up. It was supposed to be a brief trip. Me, Dave, and Aiden. Just a simple trek through the breathtaking mountains and valleys of Sujeska in the south of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Aiden, who we met in Sarajevo, was an avid hiker as well. There was some bad weather in the area, and he recommended a different way back to the lodge. He pointed on the wrinkled map. Here, he traced with his finger. This should get us back about an hour faster. We set off when the rain and wind began to lessen. We were the only ones for miles around as far as I could see, and we hurried with our walking sticks and ponchos down the muddy, winding trail. Sunlight was fading, and we realized to our consternation that we would not get back to the lodge by sunset. As we trudged a couple miles further, Dave spotted a village. There, do you guys see it? He pointed in the direction where tiled houses sprawled in the middle of a valley. At the center, we could see a tower, a minaret. What village is that? Aiden consulted his map. He shook his head. It says there's nothing there. I don't know, but we need to find shelter for the night, and we might as well go there. As the last ray of sunlight faded under the peaks, we realized while walking towards it that there was something odd about the village. Even as nightfall came, there were no lights that flickered on. The town remained deathly quiet, as though holding its breath. It wasn't until we entered the village that we realized that the minaret was cracked by shelling and the houses were dilapidated and heavily damaged. There wasn't a single soul that lived there. It had been abandoned. You guys, this place is giving me the creeps, I said. Yeah, during the war, a lot of villages were abandoned. Sometimes they never came back. I think this is one of them, explained Aiden. We decided as a group to stay in a barn with a roof that was still, for the most part, functional. On the side of the barn, scrawled in white spray paint, were the words, Street C. Jastrovica. I asked Aiden what it meant. Remember Jastrovica? I think that's the name of the village. As we cooked some leftover safapi over a small wood fire, Aiden decided to tell some legends and stories endemic to the region. Our shadows cast on the wall and flickered as he began. Have you ever heard of the Drekavac? We shook our heads no. They say that the Drekavac wander the forests throughout the Balkan. What they look like changes, depending on who's telling the story. Some say it has a long neck with the face of a cat. Others claim that it had the body of a man and the face of a dog. Some might compare it to, vampires in your culture. Dave and I nodded silently. Whatever it is or was, supposedly some farmers near Drekavac reported that some of their sheep were missing their faces, eaten clean off. Do you think a fox or a wolf could do that? No, this was something bigger, and some claimed it was the Drekavac. Some say they are creatures born out of the souls of sinful men, and they are cursed to wander the forests alone until their soul is laid to rest. And the reason they call it the Drekavac is that it comes from the word drek, to scream, and it screams just like this. At that moment, Aiden let out a blood-curdling scream which scared the hell out of me and Dave. Aiden fell over laughing until he suddenly stopped. We heard it too, and it came from outside. A scream, almost exactly like Aiden's. We all immediately ran to the entrance of the barn and looked out where the scream came from, high up in the mountains. That was just an echo? I said nervously. Yeah, Aiden muttered, his arms fidgety. Just an echo. After we put out the fire, we got out our sleeping bags and decided to settle in for the night. I immediately began to have the most terrifying nightmare of my life. I couldn't remember any of it, but when I woke up in a cold sweat, I thought I was still in it. In the corner of the barn was a humanoid figure, crouching. In the moonlight, I could see he had pale, gray skin. It stared at me with eyes like a deer that flashed as it caught the light. I've heard about sleep paralysis, but until now, I've never experienced one. I tried to close my eyes and relax. I could still hear it breathing. I opened my eyes and realized it had crept closer. It was then that I realized Aiden was up too and staring at the creature, looking absolutely terrified. Aiden looked at me, then back at the creature, then said to me, Drekavac. I realized to my horror that I wasn't actually having sleep paralysis. I immediately jumped out of my sleeping bag and scrambled for the door, yelling. Behind me, I could hear a snarling as Aiden and David both screamed. I just started to run and run and run. Finally, I was out of breath and realized I had made my way out of the village and into a forest. I looked behind me. I could no longer hear the screams of my companions. Above me, the moon cast a ghostly glow over the empty village. As I stood there, wondering where I should go, I heard the cracking of a twig across the field. There it was, crouching on a roof, the same pair of glowing eyes. The creature's movement was unsettling. It crouched with its limbs spread out like a spider. It looked at me, growled, then rapidly crawled down the side of the house and bounded towards me like a hound. I began to run like hell. I ran until I came across an empty village. I looked behind me and the creature, the Drekavac, whatever it is, just kept on running towards me. At that moment, my foot hit a log and I fell on my face. I turned around. The creature slowed its pace, and I could see it crawling on all fours, surely towards me. Its eyes were completely black, and its fangs dripped with saliva. It inched closer towards me, and I whimpered, trying to crawl away. I could hear something clinking, something metallic. I realized that around the neck of the creature was a chain necklace, and as it gleamed in the moonlight, I realized it was an Orthodox cross with a line that slanted to the right. I closed my eyes and began to pray. I could hear its breathing on my neck. I was wondering why it hadn't killed me yet when I suddenly felt his cold fingers on my forehead. I immediately felt extremely lightheaded and disoriented. At that moment, a bizarre transformation occurred. I opened my eyes and instead of the creature, the figure standing over me was a soldier. He was wearing green fatigues and a beret, and his face, smeared with mud and blood, had an expression of pure anger. No, hatred. I looked around. It was no longer night, but the middle of the day. Around me, the empty field was no longer empty, but filled with men, women, and children. The women all had headscarves, and some of them carried crying infants. I realized a second later that the women themselves were crying as well. The children were all dirty and sickly looking, and a few had passed out of dehydration in the mud. The entire field was swelteringly hot and reeked of urine. I looked at the path I took out of the village. Several military trucks pulled up, and I could see more men, women, and children piled on the back. The soldiers got out, grunted, and yelled commands for them to get out. The men all held up their hands, and for some reason, their hands had thumbs, index, and middle fingers extended. An old man struggled to get out of the truck. A soldier grabbed his rifle and hit the man using the butt of the rifle. The man fell face down on the ground while the soldiers laughed, placing their boots in the back of his head. There was a nursing mother standing right next to me. I never knew a word of whatever language they spoke in this region, but for some reason, I could understand every word. "Please, my child and I are so thirsty," she begged through sobs. "Please give us water before you kill us." A soldier came up, struck the woman on the head with his rifle. She hit the ground. He cleared his throat and then spat on her. The baby screamed as she laid on the ground, motionless. The man next to me stood with his eyes closed, his lips moving in a quiet mutter, his arms folded. A soldier spotted him praying and began to taunt him. "Look at this fellow. He thinks Allah will save him." He stood in front of the man as he prayed and began to shove at his body. The man continued to pray. As the soldier got increasingly angry, he shoved the man to the ground. The man got up and continued to pray. At that moment, I heard a voice over the loudspeaker. A soldier, no, he looked like he was a man in charge, grabbed a megaphone and sounded off a piercing siren. Everybody around me winced. I could hear whispers, fearful whispers of a name. Kursk. Kursk. That's Kursk. That butcher, have you heard about what he's done to the other villages? In a booming voice, the man proclaimed, "Whose land is this?" Silence. He looked around, his face an expression of utter disdain. "This," he pointed to the soil, "this is Serb land. It was Serb land since time immemorial. It is Serb land now. It will remain Serb land tomorrow." I noticed that the soldiers began to shepherd the villagers into rows and began to tie their hands around their backs with twine. The women and children were weeping silently while the men stood, stoic and defiant. I could hear the crying of an infant. There was silence. Overwhelming silence that covered the field and the people like a suffocating shadow. Kritsk lowered his megaphone. The soldiers raised their guns and aimed at the files of men, women, children, bound like sheep. In his booming, naked voice, he yelled Serbian war cries. He threw up his hands in the same three-figured salute I saw before. There was a deafening thundering of gunfire as an entire row of humans are mowed down, their bodies collapsing over each other in the mud. My row was next. I felt the soldier I first saw shove me forward. I heard a jingle and I saw that around his neck hung a gold chain with an Orthodox cross. He shoved my arms down violently and began to bind my wrists. The line of soldiers raised their guns again. I could hear the sounds of feverish prayer and begging. More Serbian war cries. I shuddered as my body jolted upwards. I gasped for air, hands feeling the ground below me. It was now morning. The sun was still rising in the east. I looked around. The fields were empty once more, and the creature was nowhere to be seen. In the distance, I could hear Dave and Aiden yelling for me. "Daniel, Daniel." I could see their two figures running through the trees as they spotted me. "Daniel." Aiden ran up towards me and gave me a hug. "Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you're alive." Dave came up beside us, holding an ice axe up as a weapon. That thing," I stammered. "As soon as you ran out, it followed. We didn't know where you went, but we looked for you in this field and didn't see you. Where did you go?" I was here this entire time. The women, the children, the soldiers." Aiden's smile faded. "What are you talking about?" My eyes were still wide in shock and I couldn't speak. I turned around to the place I fell, then immediately got on my knees and started to dig with my bare hands. "Daniel, what the bloody hell are you talking about?" I kept on removing chunks of the soft mud until I gasped. I didn't trip over a log. It was a human skull. All three of us recoiled in horror. All around us were pieces of clothing and human remains, barely covered by the shallow soil. Guys, Aiden said, his feet stepping back slowly. I know why this town wasn't on the map. I stared at him, then slowly and quietly began to form the words. It wasn't on the map because they wiped it off the map.